nights. I want to ask you a question. Do you consider consuming an audiobook reading? This has absolutely nothing to do with the presentation, by the way. Just completely thoughtless. Think about it. Sammy, don't answer yet. Wait until the end, and then we can answer it. Okay, so do you consider consuming an audiobook reading? I have a very stark opinion on this. For those that work with me in this room, you know I have very stark opinions on everything. This is one of them. With that, I am Chris Anderson, Senior Principal Product Manager for Cisco, focused primarily on the dual product line, and we are here to talk about how to give your users a diamond status authentication experience. Before we get started, though, let's talk about the state of authentication today. Let me see if I can't build that out fast. There we go. All right. So the only thing I really want you to focus on, actually, take that back for a minute. The state of authentication today is there's a ton of rampant attacks. Can you raise your hand, please, if you are aware that there's attacks on identity happening now? And if everybody's not raising your hand, the casino floor is one floor lower. You should probably check it out. And if you win big money, please come back up and share the wealth. But anyways, we're not going to get into the depths of these attacks. Ted Kitzman, raise your hand, please. Tomorrow, he's doing a presentation digging into these type of attacks. Check it out tomorrow afternoon. All I want to talk about is that middle row, that today's attackers are remote, they're on a personal endpoint, they're not on your network, they're breaching your users, and they are professionals being paid for it. There is kits that you can buy to actually go take these attacks. Why I want to focus on that middle row, though, is if you think about remote, on a personal endpoint, and not on your network, that probably describes a large portion of your workforce as well. So not only are attackers remote on a personal endpoint, not on your network, but that is also a large portion of your employees. And I want to focus on that because to combat some of these attacks, the industry, including that of what I represent, have made updates to our own products to try to focus on how do you assume it's a trusted user? How do you ensure it's a trusted device? How do you ensure that the context is trusted? So thinking about things like deploying MFA broadly, ensuring that the device is either registered or possibly even managed. Or from a context standpoint, which I think we have a session in about 20 minutes, Alex, talking more about context. It's about gaining that visibility of the identity and being able to understand the baseline. The outcome of this, though, is that we focused a significant amount of our times on the outcome of trying to stop these attacks. What this eventually led to, though, is the creation of things like duo push or push notifications in general with number matching. Ensuring that you deploy WebAuthn and passkeys more broadly. But the outcome of all of this is that we still are asking users to authenticate a significant amount of times. We're asking users that in order to be trusted and verified, and that we're going to ask you to re-verify your account quite often. Some of you may have logged in maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 times last week per day. And I'm just going to stand up on stage and say, I'm sorry. We're part of that problem too. We are asking you to log in a significant amount of times. And frankly, if I could curse at a session like this, I would. We can curse afterwards. But it's not a great experience. So that's what I want to talk about in this session is how do we actually get past that problem? How do we get past the problem of actually asking users to re-authenticate interactively, meaning you have to physically do something to bring out your phone, accept a push, put in a number, whatever it may be. How do you get past that? And I'm going to compare this to something that I expect everybody in this session did this week, which is go to the airport. Please actually raise your hand. Did you all take flights? Did everybody enjoy it? Got one. Thanks, Sammy. All right, so typical flight. We got Bob. Bob needs to go to his favorite conference, Cisco Live. Okay, we got a few jokes. Actually, it's Identiverse. So Bob needs to go to Identiverse, his favorite conference of the year. Bob has absolutely zero status. So what does he do? He goes to the ticket counter. He gets to the ticket counter and realizes, holy smokes, this line is insane. Wrapped around. He has one bag that he needs to check, another bag for carry-on. He's got all his fun electronics in his backpack. He's got to wait his time at the ticket counter. That's not fun. When Bob gets done at the ticket counter, he goes to TSA. How many? Raise your hand if you enjoy waiting in a TSA line. Okay, there we go. Finally, nobody raised their hand. So Bob's got to wait in the TSA line. That's not fun either. Eventually, Bob realizes he has about 5 minutes before his boarding of his flight. He's going to get some snacks. Snacks in an airport's probably more expensive than that Fiji water in your room upstairs if you're staying at the Aria. He wants just a bottle of water and maybe a bag of chips. Well, $15 later, you got it. And then Bob realizes he's got to get to his gate. How many in this room love the fact that when the zones and you're about to get ready to board, and the flight attendant or the gate attendant says, hey, we're about ready to board, we got maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes before boarding, and the entire herd of sheep just get right in front of the gate. All zones 1 through 8. Stand up. Zone's not even called yet, and they're all herding there. Well, that happens to Bob. Eventually, Bob in his zone 8 gets on his flight, gets all the way to the back of the plane, looks up at the baggage at the top, realizes, oh shoot, there's none left. Now he's got to gate check that bag, only to get in his middle seat to fly across the country. My guess is not a single person in this room, maybe Sammy, would enjoy that experience. Now the challenge is, that's actually what we're also asking Bob to do every day when he does his work. So a typical workday for Bob, he needs to log into his laptop, his desktop. He needs to access a couple different web browsers for different apps. For some reason, it's still 2024, and we still say some apps work best in Chrome or work best in Safari in Firefox. Nothing works best in Safari. He also needs to load his local Outlook. And, well, depending on his job, he might actually have to jump on a VPN to maybe get some financial data. In order to do this, Bob logs into his laptop, maybe even does an MFA into his laptop, hopefully. That doesn't actually create a session over in your SSO use cases normally, so Bob's going to have to log in again into his first web app. So that's 2 auths. And then again, he's got to take a corporate course. That corporate course works best only in Chrome, so he's got to get into Chrome, logs in. Now it's a 3rd time. Bob, for some reason, enjoys local Outlook that has an embedded browser. He's logging in for the 4th time because that session is no longer valid after his 7 days. And then Bob needs to get some financial data for his manager for whatever reason. He's got to get on the VPN, has an embedded browser. The auth that took place in the web app doesn't correlate down to the embedded browser as well, so he's logging in for a 5th time. That's 5 logins, and I probably haven't even touched 90% of the use cases, maybe you're even putting your users through. And we're asking to log in multiple times because sometimes these applications may be more sensitive. Maybe it is this first app or the second app needs to have a additional verification to it, or needs to ensure that the browser is up to date, that your OS is up to date. You have all these policies that we've deployed across the industry, and what we're actually asking Bob to do, though, is authenticate so many times to assure that he's Bob. And frankly, it's not fun. So it's pretty much like hanging out at the TSA or hanging out at the airport trying to get in that flight. So what does a diamond status look like? Well, if you're like Sammy, you probably have status with an airline because he flies across country almost every other week. So, we're not talking about Sammy then, we're going to talk about Lee. Lee needs to catch a flight. Well, Lee has status. So when Lee gets to the airport, she also has her roller bag that she needs to check. She has a bag that she's going to carry on, and she still has her fun electronics in her backpack. But when Lee gets to the check-in counter, she goes to the priority check-in. And at the priority check-in, there's maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 people in line, but they actually know what they're doing, and they move quickly, and they know how to get through it really fast. And so she goes, she checks in. When she gets her bag checked, she gets that really fancy priority tag on her bag, so when it gets to the carousel, it's the first one off. And then she also sees the long lines at TSA. But Lee has TSA Pre. Lee has Clear. Lee looks at the TSA Pre-line and says, well, shoot, half the world has that now. I'm going to go to the Clear line and hope it's a little bit shorter. And just do a quick biometric, doesn't take off the belt, doesn't take off the shoes, walks right through. And then she goes to the lounge, the fancy lounges. It's early in the morning, and Lee's like, I want some breakfast. Nice hearty breakfast with maybe some free caffeine. maybe some tea or some hot coffee, whatever it may be, but it's free. So Lee goes, gets her nice meal at the lounge, gets caffeinated, and she waits in that lounge watching maybe Sports Center. Maybe she's a fan of sports, or maybe she's reading a newspaper or a magazine. And she waits until the bell rings at the top, the intercom comes on and says, "Hey, your flight to Vegas is boarding." To which Lee goes down to the gate. She sees all the herds of people, and she just walks right past them. First one on the flight. And what she does is she sits down in her first class seat. When she sits down in her first class seat, she gets a nice drink right away, and her only worry about this flight is she can't remember what she pre-ordered for her meal across the country. Now, a quick show of hands, how many would rather take a flight like this versus the flight like Bob's? And then how many people would just rather not fly at all? There we go. I would rather not fly too. Okay, so how do we bring this, though, to Lee's work environment? Well, Lee has the same role as Bob. Lee needs to log into her OS. Lee also has to access browsers. Lee's like me, and I would prefer to use Safari all day if you haven't noticed. I also like to use local Outlook. I think it's better. It has more features. I don't want to get on the VPN, though, but sometimes I have to. And same with Lee. So what's Lee's experience looks like? Well, with her diamond status, what ends up happening is Lee logs in once. She logs into her OS. From that OS standpoint, then the device is trusted, the session is trusted, and Lee doesn't actually log in again. Whether she's going to one web app, whether she's going to a different web browser, whether she's going to the embedded browsers of the Outlook client or the VPN, Lee doesn't log in again. Now, my guess is everybody in this room would rather have this experience. If you don't want this experience, it's probably because you maybe work at an identity company and you want to test out all the different login flows. But my guess is nobody wants to log in a significant amount of times. It just wants to log in once. But the fun part about this is it doesn't end here. At an airport, behind the scenes, there's airport security. And there's coordination happening the entire time. You have federal agencies like the FBI. Depending on your flight, you might have an air marshal. You might have, well, obviously you have TSA. And they're coordinating with services like the actual airport itself, with third parties like Clear. They're coordinating with the airline. And what they're coordinating are things like maybe no-fly lists. Maybe Didi, for example, isn't allowed to fly anymore. And so what they're coordinating behind the scenes is ensuring that Didi, who is the red user on our screen, might have got past the check-in counter, but isn't going to get any further. We got to make sure that we stop him from continuing forward. And thank you, Didi, for letting me use you as an example. But you can't fly, I hope. I wish I can. All right, so anyways, there's coordination happening behind the scenes to ensure that bad things can't happen at an airport. From an authentication standpoint, we need to do the same thing. We need to ensure that behind the scenes, just because Lee isn't interactively prompted for authentication all the time, doesn't mean we're still not passing attributes when authentications aren't actually happening. She's just not physically doing them. And so while she logs in once into her laptop, behind the scenes, there's still auth happening quite a bit. And what we need to be able to do, though, is ensure that as risk changes, dynamically changes, that we can take actions. This is where we need to coordinate as an industry together, share context about what's happening in our own environments, especially for the vendors in this room. So that if a risk changes, maybe Lee logged into another application, that application is a sensitive one and it needs to have her browser updated. Cool, we need to be able to prompt Lee to be able to self-service and change and update that browser. It could be something really bad though. This is where things like ITDR comes into play, where you see visibility across all of your identities and all of your providers. Maybe, so happens, there's another auth happening in a different part of the world. We need to ensure that we can kill those sessions. And if it gets really bad, there's a rampant attack specifically against Lee, and Lee might be the CEO or a very high-powered profile individual, maybe, worst case scenario, we just need to kill all their sessions and force them to re-authenticate. Regardless, we need to be able to have dynamic reaction to risk changes, and as an organization, you need to be able to choose what those risk indicators are and how you portray them. But regardless, that coordination has to happen. So how do we make this a reality? Well, I'm here on stage to tell you that we actually can do this today, but as an industry, we still need to work together to make this even more powerful. So I'm here to say it takes all of us to achieve this. Organizationally, for your own company, you need to be choosing the right IAM strategies, whether that's just software or the services in general. You need to look at things that focus on users, devices, context, etc. You need to make sure that you're focused on things like staying up to date, being able to force policies that enforce OS logins to stay up to date, forcing browsers to stay up to date, staying up to date on the actual industry, the changes happening. This industry is changing so rapidly. You need to be able to stay up to date with it. But most importantly, in my personal opinion, we can't just focus on outcomes anymore. We need to focus on the journeys to which we send users through. If we send a user through a terrible journey, I can assure you the outcome won't be achieved the way you wish it were. I'm going to guess everybody in this room could probably get around certain things that their organization has tried to force them to do, because the journey in which they forced you through, again, I can't curse, is not a great experience. So we need to focus not just on the outcomes, not just stopping attacks, but also what is that experience we're sending the end users through as we're trying to stop those attacks. And then from a community standpoint, we need to come together better. There's obviously standards, being able to push those forward, things like signal guys in the back, shared signals framework, right? Being able to push those type of standards forward to which we can share this context more broadly. Obviously, things like open APIs can help this, but at the end of the day, as an industry, as vendors in this conference, we need to be able to focus on how can we solve the problems as an industry together. It's not always about, can I make the most amount of money? Can I steal market share from some other vendor? While that's important, we all need to have jobs and be able to come to this type of conference. We also need to focus on how can we move the industry forward? How can we collaborate together to stop these type of attacks? It's going to take all of us. There's not one person in this room, one company in this room that can solve this themselves. It's going to take all of us. And so that brings me back to the question, do you consider consuming an audiobook reading? Sammy says yes. My answer is I don't care. The real answer is, as long as you enjoy the journey into which you are achieving to consume that content. I know for a fact, I'll pick on you again, Sammy. Sammy likes to run. I think he did like 10K this morning in the heat of Vegas for some odd reason. My guess is he's probably not running down the street holding a book and running. Like, he's probably going to get hurt. But he'd probably listen to an audiobook at that point when he's working out. Additionally, I hope none of you are reading books while you're driving. So again, it's about the journey you're going down. It's about the experience you're having. Now, you might be reading a physical book when you're laying in bed, because if you fall asleep, well, the page is still on the page you fell asleep on, and you're not 4 hours later on the audiobook. So again, it doesn't matter to me what the answer here is. What matters is the journey to which you achieve to consume that content. And with that said, we have approximately 1.5 minutes left. So, if you have any questions, come see me at the Cisco booth. It's 1301 downstairs. We can also talk outside. If you want to talk about how we can achieve this type of experience today, let me know. We can talk about that. Or if you want to tell me that consuming an audiobook is more important than not, then that is fine. You let me know. Anyways, that is it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And thank you for paying attention.